Fairy circles, the desert's living mystery. Welcome to the weird and unexplained with John. If you were to fly over the Namib Desert at dawn, when the rising sun paints the dunes with gold and shadow, you might notice something strange. Out there, far beyond the reach of cities or roads, the land breathes with patterns, vast carpets of reddish soil dotted with perfect circles of bare earth. They appear like countless coins scattered by a giant's hand. No trees, no footprints. Just emptiness, ringed by life. They're called fairy circles, and even in our age of satellites and science, they remain one of Earth's quietest, most bewitching mysteries. The Namib Desert, one of the oldest deserts in the world, is a place that tests how life clings to existence. Rain rarely falls. Temperatures swing from biting cold at night to suffocating heat by noon. Yet amidst this harshness, life endures. Insects, grasses, small reptiles, and of course, humans who have watched the land for generations. When you walk out there, the wind speaks in low sighs, shifting dunes one grain at a time. The horizon feels infinite, but it's the ground beneath your feet that holds the true wonder. Imagine you're standing in the middle of one of these circles. The ring around you blooms with tall grasses, vibrant and alive, while the center, stark reddish-brown sand, is empty. The difference is sharp, almost mathematical. Sometimes the circles stretch 3 meters wide, others can span up to 15. Some overlap in patterns that look like constellations fall into Earth. No one knows exactly when people first noticed them. But to those who live nearby, the circles are older than memory, part of the desert's soul. Long before scientists arrived with notebooks and drones, stories lived in the sand. The Himba people, semi-nomadic herders of cattle and goats, have roamed these arid plains for centuries. To them, the circles were not accidents of nature. They were messages, sacred spaces born of something more powerful than science could ever name. Some believed the circles were the footprints of the gods, left behind when divine beings stepped upon the desert to create life. Others told of a great dragon that slumbered far beneath the dunes. Its fiery breath rose through the sand, scorching patches of earth and leaving behind perfect circles as a reminder of its unseen movement. In other corners of the world, where similar rings appeared in the dry regions of Western Australia, Aboriginal peoples told tales of dreamtime ancestors who shaped the land. In those stories, the circles were where spirit beings rested or danced, pressing their power into the earth itself. And then there were the fairies. In Celtic folklore, circles of mushrooms or grass appearing overnight were said to mark the sites of fairy dances. Wandering into one could mean disappearing forever into the realm of magic. While the Namib has no green forests or fair folk with wings, visitors from elsewhere, explorers, missionaries, storytellers, brought that name with them, fairy circles. Somehow, it fit. There was something enchantingly unnatural about them. If the desert could speak, it might tell us the line between myth and truth has always been blurry. Modern curiosity, as always, came with questions and measuring tapes. Scientists began to study the fairy circles in the 1970s. They wanted explanations, mechanisms, not myths. Why did the soil inside the circles refuse to grow grass? Why were the edges so perfect, so round? Why did these formations appear and disappear over the years as if alive? Early theories were simple. Perhaps gas was bubbling up from below. Maybe toxic compounds in the soil poisoned the center. Others thought termites, the tireless engineers of the desert, might be the invisible architects. In the 2010s, researchers led by Norbert Jurgens from the University of Hamburg made a groundbreaking claim. They discovered that beneath nearly every fairy circle lived a colony of sand termites, Somaterms allosaurus. These tiny insects, they argued, fed on grass roots and created the barren center. By doing so, they allowed rainwater to collect under the sand, forming underground reservoirs the termites could use during droughts. The creatures, in essence, were gardening the desert for survival. The world took notice. For a moment, it seemed the mystery had been solved. But science loves debate, and fairy circles didn't yield so easily. Other researchers proposed a competing idea: self-organization. They argued that the circles form naturally from the competition between grasses for water. When rainfall is scarce, patches of vegetation space themselves apart in regular patterns, balancing access to nutrients and moisture. Like the hexagonal cells in a beehive or the ripples of sand on a dune, the circles might be emergent patterns of life adapting to harsh conditions. The debate grew heated. Termites or vegetation? Engineers or ecosystems? The truth, as it turned out, may be both. Here's the beauty of it. When scientists used computer models to test the theories, both forces, living insects and thirsty plants, seemed capable of creating the same patterns. In the end, nature wasn't one or the other. It was a dialogue between life forms quietly cooperating and competing through invisible threads beneath the sand. For decades, the Namib held the monopoly on fairy circles. People called it the only place on Earth where this happens. But then, around 2014, satellite images from the red deserts of Western Australia told a different story. There, thousands of similar rings stretched across the outback, with the same circular precision and spatial arrangement. How could places oceans apart share the same mysterious geometry? There were no Namibian termites in Australia. The environments were superficially different soil, flora, rainfall. And yet the land spoke the same language of circles. Scientists dubbed these parallel ecosystems, manifestations of how natural laws can write identical patterns onto the skin of the earth. What's more fascinating is that similar void and ring structures appear elsewhere, from moss patches in Arctic tundra to microbial colonies growing in petri dishes. The underlying principle is called Turing pattern formation, processes described mathematically by Alan Turing, the same genius who helped crack Nazi codes during World War II. Turing had speculated that life might self-organize into repeating shapes, spots, stripes, spirals, and circles, through simple rules of reaction and diffusion. Decades later, the fairy circles proved him right. The laws governing a microbe under a microscope can also shape the face of an entire desert. Isn't that a kind of magic? To understand the circles, you have to understand the Namib itself. Rain falls here unpredictably, sometimes years apart. When it does, life explodes. Seeds hidden in the sand awaken, grasses bloom in bursts of green that paint the land like watercolors. Within months, the blazing sun takes its toll, and the brown sands reclaim what's theirs. But the fairy circles endure through this rhythm of life and death. Over decades, even centuries, they shift, fade, and return like the heartbeat of the earth. Scientists using satellite imaging have watched how new circles form slowly at the edges of old clusters, while others vanish entirely, as though a living organism is breathing just beneath the dunes. The soil inside the circles even behaves differently. It absorbs water more readily, stores heat longer, and harbors unique microbial life. It's as if each circle is a miniature world, operating by its own set of rules within the greater system of the desert. Some researchers call it a vegetation patterning ecosystem. Others just marvel at its stubborn beauty. But to stand among them is to feel the pulse of a planetary intelligence, ancient, wordless, endlessly creative. Let's step back into the scene. It's night now. The air has cooled. The stars blaze with a clarity unknown to city skies. Somewhere far away, a jackal cries, a haunting note carried by the wind. You walk between circles, your flashlight grazing the outlines of grass that encircle each barren center. The sand beneath your boots feels oddly alive, as if aware of your intrusion. You bend down, brushing your fingers across the grains. Warm, dry, but soft. Too soft, almost tender. In that quiet, surrounded by rings that no one fully understands, something inside you shifts. These patterns are precise, mathematical in their repetition, but they pulse with the irregular grace of life. It's easy to see why people once thought fairies danced here. Because what else could explain beauty with no obvious purpose? Some experiences, even in science, demand storytelling. Let's return to the fairy image for a moment. Not the glittering winged beings of children's books, but the older kind, the ones carved into the bones of folklore. To ancient minds, fairies were not sweet. They were powerful. They represented forces of nature, fertility, trickery, death, and rebirth. They were unpredictable, much like the desert itself. To call these formations fairy circles is not to dismiss science. It's to acknowledge how mystery transforms the human imagination. Every name we give to a strange phenomenon, will-o'-the-wisp, St. Elmo's fire, northern lights, starts in awe. Science later names it differently, perhaps more accurately, but the wonder remains the same. And so, even after the maps and equations, the idea persists that these circles are alive not just biologically, but spiritually. A Himba elder once told a researcher, "The circles are where the ancestors rest. Do not farm there. They belong to the earth." To them, leaving the circles untouched wasn't superstition, it was respect. A recognition that not everything needs explanation or ownership. Every generation rediscovers the fairy circles. New technologies, new sensors, new data, yet the riddle continues. Even with termite theories and vegetation models, some circles disobey the rules. Their lifespans vary, their distribution changes, and sometimes new circles bloom unexpectedly after rains. There's a growing idea among ecologists that the mystery might not have a single solution because the circles themselves are adaptive. Their origin may differ across landscapes. In some places, termites might dominate. In others, soil-water feedback does. Nature, ever practical, uses whatever tools it can to achieve balance. And perhaps that's the real lesson. The desert isn't a barren wasteland but a vast laboratory, running its own experiments in survival. Scientists chasing the fairy circles often describe a strange emotional effect, a realization that even in one of the harshest environments on Earth, life finds exquisite order. Standing there, surrounded by circles upon circles stretching to the horizon, they feel something both humbling and uplifting. A voice, if you listen closely, whispering, "There's still magic in the world. You just have to look closely enough to see it." Once you start seeing patterns in the desert, you start seeing them everywhere. In the cracked mud of a drying riverbed. In the rings around Saturn, in ripples of sea foam left by retreating waves. In the freckles of a leopard or the spiral of a sunflower. The universe seems to love repetition, symmetry, order born from chaos. Fairy circles invite us to notice that, to realize that pattern may be the Earth's way of speaking. Every round shape you see, from a raindrop to a planet, follows invisible forces that blend mathematics and art. The Namib circles are no exception. They're not random curiosities. They're expressions of intention, whether by termites, plants, or the planet itself. Imagine now that you're watching drone footage gliding over the desert at sunrise. The camera rises higher, revealing thousands of circles, each perfect, each whispering a fragment of an unseen design. The light changes the color of the sand from iron red to soft gold. Somewhere in the distance, a herd of oryx crosses one of the patterns, their hoof prints temporary marks over ancient geometry. As the drone climbs higher, the circles merge into a shimmering texture that looks almost like reptile skin or the surface of a vast living creature. You realize you could be staring at the Earth's own fingerprints, the signature of nature's endless creativity. From above, the scene is breathtakingly beautiful. But it's more than that, it's humbling. Because here, in a place so dry and empty, life has painted its most intricate masterpiece. The fairy circles remind us that even in silence, in scarcity, the planet is alive with imagination. In recent years, ecologists have begun including local communities in studying and preserving these landscapes. The Himba and other desert peoples, who once told stories about dragons and ancestors, are now partners in the quest to understand how these ecosystems sustain life. Ironically, the scientific and spiritual worlds have started to overlap again. What began as myth becomes data, and what began as data becomes reverence. There's an unspoken rule in this research now. You can measure, sample, and model, but you must never forget that you're entering a sacred landscape. The desert doesn't give up its secrets easily. And perhaps that's why it continues to inspire awe. So what are fairy circles, really? Termites? Competition between plants? The work of ancestors or the grace of geometry? Maybe all of those at once. Maybe none. Because in the end, mystery is the heart of meaning. The moment we label something completely, we stop looking deeper. But fairy circles don't let you stop. Their symmetry keeps tugging at your attention, whispering that the world still holds puzzles even our brightest minds can't solve. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. Fairy circles are proof that wonder hasn't left us. In a world mapped by satellites and explained by algorithms, this mystery refuses to be boxed in. It lives, breathes, disappears, and reappears, asking us to keep imagining. So if you ever find yourself walking across the Namib at dusk, and you stumble upon one of these circles glowing orange in the last light of the sun, stop. Don't step inside right away. Listen to the wind. Feel the ground. Remember that you're standing in a place where stories older than memory overlap with questions newer than time. In that moment, it doesn't matter if fairies are real or not. The wonder is, and maybe that's all the truth we need. Thank you for exploring the mystery of the fairy circles with us. If you love stories that blend myth, science, and wonder, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Every week we travel deeper into Earth's hidden marvels, because magic and mystery are never far away.